Welcome to today's deep dive. If you are analyzing global markets or maybe managing a cross-border team or really just trying to understand the underlying mechanics of global growth.
You're in the exact right place today.
Exactly. The data we're looking at today is going to fundamentally shift how you view economic potential. We're providing you with what is essentially a master cheat sheet to understanding a massive untapped global economic engine. And looking across the desk, I see you've already got the October 2025 data sets highlighted on your end.
Ready when you are. The data we were digging into today really is foundational. It completely changes the lens through which we view macroeconomic resilience and global labor markets.
So let's set the baseline for what we're actually looking at here. Our primary source today is a massive, highly detailed report from the World Bank Group. It's titled Women, Business, and the Law 2026.
Right. And this report measures the laws and regulations affecting women's economic opportunities across
190. And it's important to note for you listening that this isn't trailing data. This is current all the way up to October 2025. Okay, let's unpack this. Because what we're really talking about today is the ultimate economic puzzle of our time. It's the systemic gap between what is written in the law and what actually functions in reality.
Yeah, that gap is the core utility of this entire report. Historically, economic analysis might look at a law being passed, check a box, and then model future growth based on that legislative victory.
Like, okay, we passed the law, problem solved.
Exactly. But this data forces a much more rigorous evaluation. It asks whether a new law actually translates into a lived reality for the workforce. Does it create a tangible, accessible opportunity? The methodology here shifts away from just counting the laws on the books to examining the entire bureaucratic and institutional ecosystem that surrounds those laws.
And the reality of that global ecosystem is pretty stark. The report drops a massive factual nugget right at the beginning. Today, less than 5% of women worldwide live in economies that provide anything close to full legal equality. Less than 5%.
Yeah. And when we look across all 190 economies measured, not a single one has secured all the legal rights needed for full economic participation. Zero.
It is a profound structural inefficiency. To understand why this matters on a macro scale, we really have to look past just the social implications and view it as a fundamental macroeconomic imperative. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the economic cost of leaving women on the sidelines is staggering.
Let's hear the numbers.
The data suggests that reducing gender gaps in labor force participation could boost global GDP by 15% to 20%.
Wow, up to 20% globally.
Right. And when we zoom in on regions where women's labor is the most constrained, places like the Middle East and North Africa or MENA and South Asia, that potential GDP boost approaches a massive 50%.
50% boost to an entire region's GDP. That is the kind of metric that alters global trade balances. To put that systemic misallocation of capital into perspective for you, it's like operating a high-performance sports car and trying to win a race with half your engine just turned off.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there wondering why you aren't hitting top speed. You are artificially capping your own throughput. And the data clarifies a major misconception here too.
Which is the zero-sum myth.
Fixing this bottleneck doesn't mean taking opportunity away from existing workers. The report points out that in economies with stronger equality laws, male labor force participation actually goes up as well.
Expands the pie.
Exactly. Equality expands the entire market size rather than just redistributing it. It formalizes the economy, which creates new sectors and elevates overall participation.
That sports car analogy is highly accurate. When barriers are removed, when women can work freely, access credit to start businesses, and step into leadership roles, the labor market allocates talent based on efficiency and skill rather than arbitrary legal constraints.
Firms become more innovative.
Productivity rises. The overall quality of jobs improves because the formal sector expands, drawing people out of informal, unregulated labor. Removing these legal constraints unlocks a vast reservoir of human capital. It is simply the most direct lever a country can pull to increase its baseline growth potential.
But knowing the lever exists and knowing how to pull it are two very different things.
Very different.
Which brings us to the 2.0 framework that this 2026 report introduces. They've completely upgraded their methodology. It's no longer just a binary check of whether a piece of paper exists. They are using a 3-pillar diagnostic tool to measure the actual distance between paper and practice.
And the first pillar is legal frameworks, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's the laws currently on the books. This measures the degree of legal rights and any explicit restrictions on women's work and entrepreneurship.
And what's the score there?
Globally, the average score for this first pillar is 67 out of 100.
Okay, 67 out of 100 gives us a baseline. But the diagnostic tool gets much sharper when we move to Pillar 2.
All right, Pillar 2 is supportive frameworks. This examines the institutions, the bureaucratic policies, the access justice mechanisms, and the actual services needed to support the implementation of those laws.
And this is where the global average score plummets to 47 out of 100. Here's where it gets really interesting. That is a massive 20-point drop.
A huge gap.
We have the legal frameworks scoring a 67, but the systemic support failing at a 47. Let's unpack the mechanics of that failure. Having a law on the books without a supportive framework is essentially an unfunded mandate.
Just words.
Right. For instance, a country might pass a comprehensive law addressing domestic violence scoring points in Pillar 1, but if there is no allocated budget for a specialized family court, no standardized training for local police to handle the reports, and no legal aid services funded by the state, that law is a ghost.
It exists in the capital's legislative records, but not in the daily lives of the citizens. That is the exact bureaucratic reality Pillar 2 is measuring.
Give us another example.
Well, you might also have a law that guarantees equal pay for equal work. But if there is no regulatory body established to audit payrolls, ensure transparency, or handle wage discrimination complaints without extreme costs to the worker, the law has no teeth.
It's unenforceable.
Which naturally leads us into Pillar 3, which is enforcement perceptions. This pillar captures expert views on how well public authorities actually enforce these laws in practice day to day.
And the global average here sits at 50 out of 100.
Right. So we have this pronounced structural imbalance. The legislation might be drafted, but the supportive frameworks are severely lacking, and the enforcement is partial at best.
To give you a clearer picture of where these failures are happening, this three-pillar diagnostic is applied across 10 specific topics. These track a woman's entire economic life cycle.
It's a comprehensive sweep.
We're talking about safety, mobility, work, pay, marriage, parenthood, childcare, entrepreneurship, access, and pension, from the moment someone enters the workforce to the day they retire.
Analyzing the data across those 10 life cycle topics reveals precisely where the global economy is stalling. The report shows relatively stronger scores in areas like mobility, meaning the legal right to travel outside the home or country, and marriage.
But there are some severe weak points.
Yes, the weakest links, the topics that consistently score the lowest across all three pillars, are safety, entrepreneurship, and childcare.
Let's dig into the mechanics of those specific weakest links, because this is where the macroeconomic data connects directly to human friction.
Starting with safety.
Yeah, the report notes that globally, barely a third of the laws needed to protect women from violence are actually in place. And even where the legal frameworks exist, experts report that enforcement is ineffective in roughly 80% of cases.
80%.
The economic downstream effect of that is immediate. You cannot participate in a labor market, commute to an office, or run a storefront if your basic physical safety is compromised.
The foundation.
Then we look at entrepreneurship. The basic legal right to start a business is almost universal now. But in 91 of the 190 economies, employment laws do not prohibit discrimination against women in access to credit.
The credit access issue is a perfect example of how an invisible barrier functions. If the law doesn't explicitly prohibit discrimination, a bank's underwriting algorithms or loan officers might legally require a female business owner to provide a male cosigner.
Regardless of her revenue or business plan.
Exactly. Or if property laws in that economy traditionally deed land to the male head of household, which touches on the assets topic, the woman has no collateral to offer for a commercial loan.
Without access to capital, businesses can't scale, inventory can't be purchased, and an entire demographic of entrepreneurs is locked out of the formal banking sector.
And then we hit the critical infrastructure issue, which is childcare. This isn't just a household logistical issue. It is a massive structural roadblock situated right in the middle of a worker's prime earning years.
It's huge.
What's fascinating here is how the data reveals a near-total collapse of supportive frameworks regarding childcare. The global gaps are substantial across all income levels. But in low-income economies, only about 1% of the essential supportive frameworks for childcare are actually in place.
1%.
Let me repeat that for emphasis. 1%. In 44 of the 190 economies measured, childcare services for children under the age of 3 remain completely unregulated by the state.
A 1% supportive framework means the system is virtually non-existent.
It's not there.
When we look at the mechanics of that, it means there are no quality standards, no subsidies, and no public infrastructure. So mothers are forced into an impossible economic trade-off.
Without reliable, regulated, and affordable childcare, A worker has to drastically cut their hours, decline promotions that require more time, or just step out of the labor force entirely.
And stepping out of the labor force doesn't just impact immediate earning power, it impacts the pay and pension topics later in the life cycle. Missing 5 to 10 years of work means missing out on a decade of compounding retirement contributions and wage growth.
This creates a severe wealth gap in the later stages of life.
All of these systemic bottlenecks, the lack of credit, the absent childcare, the safety risks, they all feed directly into a massive macroeconomic shift that is happening right now. We have a demographic time bomb heading our way.
We do.
Over the next decade, 1.2 billion young people are going to enter the global workforce, and half of them, say 100 million, are girls.
This raises an important question. Where exactly is this population growth happening? Because the economic impact depends entirely on location. The report reveals a very stark mismatch. The regions with the fastest growing youth populations, specifically Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and the Middle East and North Africa, are the exact same regions where the legal and institutional barriers to women's economic opportunity remain the absolute highest.
That is wild. The places that have the largest influx of new talent, the places that most desperately need to harness this youth wave to industrialize and build their economies, are legally locking half of that talent out of the building.
The opportunity cost is immense.
I want you to consider the scale of that misallocation. Think about what 600 million restricted workers means for future global supply chains, for emerging market growth, and for the sheer volume of intellectual property and innovation that will simply never materialize because a young woman with a brilliant idea couldn't secure a commercial lease or a business loan.
To fully grasp the global picture, we have to look at the other side of this demographic shift too.
The aging economies.
Exactly. In high-income OECD economies, as well as in East Asia and much of Europe, populations are rapidly aging. The labor pool is shrinking, and dependency ratios, meaning the number of retirees compared to active workers, are climbing fast.
Right.
For those economies to sustain their productivity and fund their social safety nets, tapping into women's skills and increasing female labor force participation is not a social initiative. It is the only mathematical way forward. They need that labor supply to maintain baseline economic stability.
So we have a situation where emerging markets are suppressing their demographic dividend, and mature markets are desperate for labor they aren't fully utilizing. It's a complex global puzzle.
It is.
But the report isn't just an audit of failures. I want to pivot here because there is substantial momentum and a lot of actionable data here. Between October 2023 and October 2025, the report found that 68 economies enacted 113 specific legal reforms
Aimed at expanding women's economic opportunities.
Yes, policymakers are clearly looking at this data and adjusting their frameworks.
The legislative momentum is highly relevant. Governments are actively strengthening protections, expanding leave policies, and removing outdated employment restrictions.
And who are the top performers?
If we evaluate the data impartially, looking strictly at the volume and impact of legislative changes during this 2-year period, 6 economies emerge as the top performers globally.
Wait, let's hear them.
Treating the legal changes purely as objective data. Those 6 are Egypt, Madagascar, Somalia, Oman, Jordan, and the Kyrgyz Republic. They've taken targeted steps to dismantle discriminatory provisions across multiple topics in the life cycle.
Let's rapid fire through the specific mechanics of some of these reforms so we can make this memorable for you listening, because they show exactly how an economy can transition from paper to practice.
Sure, let's start with Madagascar.
Okay, Madagascar repealed restrictions on women working in industrial jobs that were previously deemed too dangerous, and they removed bans on working in specific economic sectors.
But they didn't just remove old barriers. They built new supportive frameworks by enacting laws specifically dealing with remote work, and they introduced paid leave for fathers, which helps balance the childcare load.
That's a huge structural shift.
Yeah.
And Egypt took similar steps regarding workplace restrictions.
Based on the report, yes. The government there removed legacy restrictions on women working at night and eliminated bans on jobs previously classified as dangerous for women.
And crucially, addressing the pay topic, Egypt mandated equal remuneration for work of equal value, which requires a much more rigorous evaluation of job roles than simply equal pay for equal work.
Then moving to Somalia, the objective data shows they enacted critical legal changes that dismantled long-standing discriminatory provisions. They specifically focused on expanding women's employment opportunities and removing restrictive barriers in the workplace.
When a country updates its core labor code to be more inclusive, it signals a major shift in how it views its available human capital.
In Jordan, we see targeted intervention in the entrepreneurship and work topics. They established a 20% quota for women on corporate boards.
Which forces a diversification of leadership and capital allocation.
Furthermore, under the parenthood topic, Jordan established strict legal protections from dismissal for pregnant workers. That addresses one of the most common friction points where women are pushed out of the formal economy.
The reforms in Oman are really a masterclass in structural systemic fixes. Through their social protection law, Oman shifted the responsibility for maternity leave payments away from the private employer and directly to the government.
That is brilliant economic policy.
It really is, because if an employer has to pay out of pocket for a worker's maternity leave, they have a built-in financial disincentive to hire women of childbearing age. By shifting that cost to the state, the government completely neutralized that bias in the hiring process.
It fundamentally alters the calculus for private sector hiring. Additionally, Oman addressed the pension topic by mandating that periods of childcare now count toward the calculation of pension benefits.
Directly combating the compound wealth gap we discussed earlier.
Exactly. Finally, the Kyrgyz Republic passed a new 2025 labor code that removed legacy restrictions on women working in heavy industry sectors like mining, construction, energy, and transportation.
And they established a mandate for equal pay for work of equal value for the first time. The objective data clearly shows a geographic and strategic diversity in how these reforms are being implemented.
It's encouraging to see that when the bottlenecks are identified, structural changes follow. The World Bank report synthesizes this entire 2.0 methodology by describing the women, business, and the law data as acting simultaneously as both a mirror and a map.
I love that concept, a mirror and a map.
Dual utility of the data is what makes it actionable. It serves as a mirror because it objectively reflects the current reality of an economy. It forces policymakers to look at their exact legal gaps and systemic imbalances.
It strips away the rhetoric and shows exactly where a country is artificially capping its own growth.
And it functions as a map because it provides specific evidence-based coordinates for reform. It tells regulators and the private sector exactly where they need to invest capital to build supportive frameworks and improve enforcement.
So what does this all mean? If we synthesize the thousands of data points from this 2026 report, the overarching thesis is clear. Passing a law is just step one.
It's the starting line.
Exactly. Without the supportive frameworks like the funded family courts, the regulated childcare infrastructure, the data systems, the state-backed maternity funds, and without the actual on-the-ground enforcement of those rules, those laws are just words on paper.
That is the ultimate takeaway. Knowledge is most valuable when it is applied. What this rigorous data proves is that achieving gender parity in the workforce isn't just a fairness box to check. It is the fundamental blueprint for building a resilient, productive global economy.
It's macroeconomic baseline engineering.
Right. Given the impending demographic shifts, the aging populations in mature markets and the youth influx in emerging markets, no economy can afford to leave half of its potential human capital untapped. The data provides the map. Now institutions have to actually build the infrastructure.
They have to build the infrastructure. That is perfectly stated. And as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Applying this directly to the listener.
Right, applying this global data directly to your own environment. Think about your own workplace or industry right now. Let's say the legislative bodies in your country suddenly achieved a perfect 100 on this index tomorrow.
Perfect legal frameworks, fully funded supportive systems, and flawless enforcement.
Exactly. If that happened tomorrow, how long would it actually take for the unwritten social norms and the ingrained daily culture in your office to catch up? And what subtle, invisible barriers would still be left standing in the hallway?
That's a great question.
It's something to critically evaluate as you look at your own teams. Thank you for joining us for this conversation and for digging into the data with us on today's deep dive. We will catch you next time.